Good morning. My name is Corey Walker. I'm Dean of the Wake Forest University School of Divinity and the Wake Forest Professor of the Humanities. And I want to thank you for joining us for the 2026 McBrien Prophetic Preaching Series. The McBrien Prophetic Preaching Series was established in honor and memory of George McLeod McBrien, Sr., class of 1941, by George and Carol Williamson, longtime supporters of Wake Forest University and early advocates for the School of Divinity. Brian was professor of religion and taught at the university for 37 years after joining the faculty in 1956. He introduced courses on feminism, religion and science, medical ethics, and Black and liberation theology. He fought tirelessly for civil rights, pursued social reform, and was instrumental in helping to integrate Wake Forest College in the 1960s. Brian wrote several books on social justice, including These Few Also Paid a Price and Voices in the Wilderness. The 2026 McBrien program takes up the theme, Prophetic Preaching in a Fractured World. But we must be clear. The fractures of our world are not incidental. They are structured by histories of gendered, sexualized, and racialized inequality, by vicious forms of nationalism and xenophobia, by the devastations of economic exploitation and indigenous dispossession, by the erosion of democratic institutions, and by the planetary crisis that threatens the very conditions of life itself. These are not discrete issues. They are interlocking expressions of a deeper disorder, a disfiguring of our common life and our theological imagination. So let's begin by saying that we are living through a very dangerous time. Everyone in this room is in one way or another aware of that. We are in a revolutionary situation, no matter how unpopular that word has become in our country. So any citizen of this country who figures himself responsible, and particularly those members of the community of the faithful, must be prepared to go for broke. Or to put it another way, you must understand that in the attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it is operating not only in the academy and the church, but in society, you will meet the most fantastic, the most brutal, and the most determined resistance. These words from James Baldwin's A Talk to Teachers, with an appropriate modification for our context and sphere of concern, is a most appropriate place to begin to engage our shared work. Baldwin is a barometer for society in general and American democracy in particular. His bracing words and declarations are apt instruments to measure the deep pressures at work in the social, cultural, and political fabric of the nation. He does not flinch at the task to speak truth to power, and as Amilcar Cabral would offer a few years later after Baldwin's speech, to tell no lies and claim no easy victories. Baldwin sets the agenda for those who take up the audacious task of preaching in our times. In this moment of profound crisis, when the very foundations of democracy tremble beneath the weight of inequality, injustice, war, and environmental degradation, we are summoned anew to this sacred task. This is not the comfortable word of convenience, but the disruptive and redemptive word that became flesh, that calls us to bear witness to what is and what ought to be. We live in an era when democratic institutions are eroded by authoritarian impulses, when truth is subjugated to power, and when the sacredness of every human life is violated by systems of racialized capitalism, mass incarceration, xenophobia, and global warfare. Too often, the community of the faithful have been seduced, by the politics of empire and comfort and has lost its prophetic voice. Instead of being a sanctuary for the poor, the broken, and the oppressed, it too frequently becomes a chaplain to the status quo. The prophetic tradition, stretching from the cries of Amos to the liberating ministry of Jesus, demands that we let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. To proclaim the gospel today is to speak truth to power, to challenge the normalization of violence, and to insist that the divine image in every human being must be honored and protected. It is precisely here that prophetic preaching emerges, not as an ornament to religious life, not as mere rhetorical performance, but as a form of bold and faithful witness in dark times. But this is not a simple task, for as Renita Weems reminds us, it is easier to be a preacher than a prophet. Prophetic preaching at its best refuses the easy comforts of nostalgia and the false assurances of inevitability. It does not sanctify the status quo, nor does it retreat into abstraction. Rather, it names the world as it is, fractured, unequal, endangered, while daring to proclaim the world as it ought to be. This is the tradition we inherit here at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. But let us be clear, the challenge before us is not simply that the world is fractured. It is that our fractures have become theological. We inhabit an age in which political conflicts are imbued with ultimate meanings, where policy disagreements are cast as moral absolutes, and where religious language is often deployed not to deepen understanding, but to harden divisions. Ours is, in many ways, an age of what might be called the theological organization of political hatreds. In such a moment, the task of prophetic preaching is neither to inflame nor to evade these tensions. It is to interrupt their very logics, to unsettle their foundations, to disrupt the frameworks that render our divisions inevitable, and to reorient us toward a more expansive vision of human being and belonging. This is why prophetic preaching requires more than rhetorical skill, linguistic dexterity, and polysyllabic prowess. It demands theological depth, interpretive dexterity, ethical responsibility and accountability, and epistemological hospitality. It must cultivate, in the words of the late Katie Cannon, a hermeneutic of survival, a way of reading the world from the underside, where the stakes of injustice are most acutely felt, and then begin to weave new worlds that expand and open up new possibilities. It calls for what we might name an untimely theological thinking, a form of theological reflection that resists the pressures of immediacy and utility in order to ask more fundamental questions. What is the meaning of justice? What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to live faithfully in a world where the very conditions of life, ecological, political, social, are under constant threat? And in so doing, it offers not only critique, but construction. Visions of community, of solidarity, of belonging, of what democracy might yet become when grounded in an ethic of care, accountability, and shared responsibility. But prophetic preaching does not stand alone. It is not a singular figure behind a podium or in a pulpit. It is formed within communities capable of discerning truth, resisting injustice, sustained by traditions and memory, animated by imagination, and oriented toward just futures. Prophetic preaching is not simply about proclamation. As the Epistle to the Hebrews reminds us, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Prophetic preaching lives in that tension between what is and what can be. Walter Rauschenbusch captured that tension with clarity. The kingdom of God is always but coming. It is never fully here, never fully realized, yet always demanding our participation. To preach prophetically, then, is to stand in that holy tension between what is and what can be, and to summon communities to live as if the coming reign of justice is already at work among us, to stand at the edge of history and possibility, and to declare that the fractures of our world are not ultimate. It is to believe, against the evidence of despair, that new forms of life are still possible. It is for us to risk, as James Baldwin urged, going for broke, to confront the accumulated weight of injustice with a faith that is not naive but disciplined, not passive but courageous. For to preach in this moment is not to repeat inherited formulas, but to engage in what might be called a new way of thinking and engaging the world. And I am convinced that now is the time for us to embody, to experience, and to live out this new way of living and thinking. This is our hour, and we must awaken to our prophetic vocation, not merely to survive, but to bear witness, and not merely to endure, but to transform, and to speak and live as if the kingdom of God is always but coming. Our morning program will be chaired by Professor Melva Sampson. Professor Sampson is a nationally recognized teacher, scholar, preacher, and leader in the fields of preaching, practicing theology, and digital ministry. Professor Sampson is an ordained minister, practicing theologian, digital curator, whose work sits at the intersections of preaching, performance, and prophetic imagination. She is the founder of the Pink Robe Chronicles, an innovative digital hush harbor launched in 2016 that reclaims sacred space for Black women's stories, grief, joy, and resistance. Through this groundbreaking ministry, she has cultivated an intergenerational community of thousands who gather weekly in digital and embodied spaces to engage liturgy, ritual, and sacred memory outside the confines of traditional church walls. As assistant teaching professor of preaching and practical theology at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, Professor Sampson teaches and mentors the next generation of faith leaders, emphasizing contextual preaching, insurgent proclamation, and Afro-centered womanist perspectives. Her intellectual interests include digital Black religion, insurgent homiletics, Black radical imagination, sacred memory, and Afrofuturist theologies of liberation. Her book, The Pink Robe Chronicles, Womanist Wisdom for Healing, Liberation, and Love, will be released by Broadview Press in August of this year, and her current book project, Digital Insurgent Homiletics, is under contract with Fortress Press. Professor Sampson is also the co-founder of the One Love Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a community-rooted celebration of art, innovation, and collective flourishing. In October of 2025, Professor Sampson received the Ella P. Mitchell Pioneer in Ministry Award from Women Preach Incorporated. The award honors leaders whose work is recognized as pioneering a legacy of justice, access, empowerment, and wholeness for women in preaching and women in nonprofit organizations. In February of this year, Professor Sampson delivered the 2026 Presbyterian Lectures at Columbia Theological Seminary. Across her work, Professor Sampson weaves together scholarship, ministry, digital storytelling, and community organizing to create spaces where the spirit meets the streets and where ancestral intelligence and abundant imagination are nurtured for a fractured world. Please join me in welcoming Professor Melva Sampson.
Good morning to both our audience that is here and to those that are sharing with us in the virtual space on YouTube. There are moments in the life of the church and in the life of the world when preaching must refuse to behave, when it must step outside the pulpit, beyond the page, and into the trembling, breathing, embodied realities of people whose lives are already sermons, already texts, already sites of divine utterance. This is one of those moments. In a fractured world where bodies are surveilled, constrained, commodified, and too often rendered disposable, prophetic preaching cannot remain confined to what is said. It must concern itself with how the world lives, how the world moves. Not simply the Word made flesh as if incarnation were a one-time event, but the flesh that performs the Word again and again through the bodies that bear the weight of history and still dare to speak. It is precisely here in this sacred and contested terrain that our guests meet us. Reverend Dr. Valle-Ruiz is a homiletician who refuses narrow definitions of preaching. As Associate Professor of Homiletics and Worship and Director of Community Worship Life at McCormick Theological Seminary, she invites us to expand our imagination of proclamation beyond the pulpit and into the fullness of embodied expression. Her groundbreaking work, as one among many affirming a multitude of embodied preaching practices, names what many have long known but have not always been given language to articulate: that preaching happens in the streets, in symbolic action, in theater, in the very gestures and movements of bodies, navigating a world that does not always recognize their sacredness. Her scholarship draws deeply from performance theory, trauma theory, decolonial and queer studies, fields that help us attend to the ways bodies carry memory, resistance, rupture, and possibility. She asks us to consider how preaching emerges not only from what is proclaimed, but from who is proclaiming, and how their embodied realities shape the meaning, reception, and transformative potential of the word. Reverend Valle-Ruiz work on Latina clergy, her engagement with post-colonial liturgical preaching, and her co-edited volume, Unmasking White Preaching, all push us to confront the ways racialized and colonized frameworks have shaped what we have come to accept as normative preaching. And yet, she does not stop at critique. She gestures towards possibility, toward a repertoire of preaching practices that honors multiplicity, creativity, and the sacred knowledge carried in marginalized bodies. And this is where her work resonates so deeply with the moment we are in, and with the work many of us are committed to. Because when we talk about prophetic preaching in a fractured world, we are talking about preaching that emerges from bodies living at the intersections of interlocking oppressions, bodies that know what it means to be rendered invisible and yet insist on being seen, bodies that have been silenced and yet continue to testify, bodies that remember, resist, and reimagine. She understands that these bodies are not obstacles to proclamation, they are its very ground. They are not interruptions to the word. They are the medium through which the word is made manifest in this time. An ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, a scholar shaped by Vanderbilt, Princeton, Louisville, and the University of Puerto Rico, and an artist whose formation includes theater, law, and liturgical leadership, she brings a depth and range of experiences that refuses easy categorization. Her presence among us today is a gift, an invitation to stretch, to reconsider, and to reimagine what prophetic preaching can be when we take embodiment seriously. So, as we listen to this moment, this gathering, this series, this sacred inquiry into prophetic preaching, I invite you to listen not only with your ears, but with your whole body, to consider where the word has already been speaking through your own flesh, and to be open to the possibility that what you are about to encounter may expand not only your understanding of preaching, but your sense of what it means to be a vessel of the word in a fractured world. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Liz Valle-Ruiz.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am delighted to be here for the first time in this part of the world and the United States and this campus. Using ritual and performance studies, this presentation argues that theological activism is prophetic preaching for a fractured world, effectuating the prophet's alternative vision here and now by disrupting existing hegemonies and expectations. Theological activism allows prophet preachers not only to expose their ideas, but to enact them and effectuate their purposes. After I finish this introduction, I will share a perception of this fractured world from my social location as a Puerto Rican playful skull activist who prefers queer, decolonial, and other liberationist lenses. Then I will share the concept of theological activism, its characteristics, and some examples to finish with an invitation for you to go forth and do the same. We live in a fractured world. These fractures affect us differently according to our embodiment, social location, and lived experiences. The historical junction that we are living in and sharing includes common news headlines. Here are some that are front and center for me. People held by immigration and customs enforcement regardless of immigration status. Recording No Kings protests. Demonstrators in Maryland and Washington are protesting the expansion of ICE detention facilities. In Hagerstown, protesters placed chalk outlines representing deaths in federal custody ahead of a court hearing on a proposed center. Mexican national dies in detention. His death marks the 47th in ICE custody under the current administration. The United States has joined Israel in an all-out war on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Americans are directly blaming Donald Trump for soaring gas costs following the Iran conflict and his administration's policies. Post on US President Donald Trump's Truth social account depicts an AI-generated image of himself, apparently as Jesus, or maybe a doctor, posted on April 12, 2026. The uproar over Trump's lengthy social media attack on the first American Pope as too liberal and too weak on crime, together with the AI image, have crystallized a shift in opinion among many Catholic conservatives since the war began. An ICE officer fatally shot a 37-year-old woman, Renee Nicole Goodman, in Minneapolis on Wednesday, January 7, 2026. On January 3, 2026, U.S. military forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, in Caracas. They were transported to New York to face charges of narcoterrorism, drug trafficking, and weapon offenses in the Southern District of New York. Maduro pleaded not guilty, claiming he is a kidnapped president. And I thought, in what world are we living that one country can kidnap the president of another? And then I remember, oh, right, we have done this before. A federal immigration enforcement agent praised Reverend David Black of the First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, as he and other protesters demonstrate outside of the ICE facility in Broadview, Friday, September 19, 2025. Clergy say religious rights are under attack inside and outside Broadview ICE facility. Chicago area religious leaders have been hit with tear gas and pepper balls outside the building. They also say immigrants are being denied pastoral care inside the facility. Chicago alderperson was arrested by federal immigration agents last week inside a hospital in the city's Humboldt Park neighborhood. You see, it doesn't matter your immigration status. You can even be an elected person and still be arrested by ICE. Former Venezuelan detainees speak out about abuse in El Salvador's mega prison. The Iran war, the remilitarization of Puerto Rico, the gentrification of the Puerto Rican neighborhood in Chicago, the gentrification of whole Puerto Rico, a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans as the dream of the Puerto Rican government. Where our Puerto Ricans are supposed to go. It's not just news headlines, it's a reality in the city where I live. A reality that adds to the already fractured minds of oppressed communities who have survived historical and intergenerational trauma, persistent and pervasive group, institutional adverse experiences, adverse childhood experiences, adverse adult experiences, simply by being members of marginalized groups, being actively persecuted. The current reality of our fractured world is more compound trauma. What can theological activism contribute to a fractured world? This proposal is particularly helpful for audiences that are not listening. Theological activism emerges from the overlaps of art, justice, and theology. Between art and justice, we find artivism. Between art and theology, we find theopoetics. Between theology and justice, we find prophetic preaching. Theological activism combines theopoetics and artivism to generate a particular expression of prophetic preaching. As a method of interpretation, theopoetics seeks to articulate the spiritual meaning that comes to us in, by, and through a symbolic experience. It affirms the transcendent significance of inspired texts or religious objects, and attempts to recognize that which God manifests to us in our encounter with the sacred symbol. As a form of religious thinking, theopoetics asserts the primacy of invention and imaginative construction. It is particularly appropriate for considering the experience of ritual and worship. Activists use performance to intervene in political contexts, struggles, and debates. Performance, for some, because you can also use other forms of art, is the continuation of politics by other means. Activists actively summon the tools of performance to fight for political and economic change. The work of the prophet is to be able to project before the people an alternative future to the one the king wants to project as the only thinkable one. The formula of prophetic preaching is to denounce and proclaim. Given that we are drawing from theopoetics and artivism, the formula then is expanded to become disrupt and enact. Art, whether it is a performance or an artifact, makes the difference between proposing and doing, between denouncing and disrupting, between denouncing and disrupting what is being denounced, between proclaiming good news and enacting that good news. Here's another way to describe the formula. It is by posing two questions. The first question is, what breaks God's heart? That is what we need to disrupt. The second question is, what does an alternative future full of divine justice looks like, feels like to the touch, sounds like, smells like, tastes like? That is what we need to enact. In sum, the combination of theopoetics, activism, and prophetic preaching is theological activism, and it has these characteristics. It articulates spiritual meaning through sacred symbols. It uses art to intervene in political contexts to fight for change. In other words, it's political and public theology. It disrupts the future the king wants as the only thinkable one. It projects and enacts an alternative future of divine justice. I will proceed to share some examples. Most of them are incomplete, meaning that they don't show all four of these characteristics. The first example is Seth Todd from Portland, facing eyes in a frog costume. This is activism, but it lacks an explicit theological claim. It is important to note that he didn't have the intention of necessarily doing even a political claim. He just wanted to bring a smile to the people, as he said himself. But the benefit of this kind of performance is that it can easily go viral and be adapted. When it went viral, it created community, like a community of frogs. But it also created community of diversity. When we see people in different kinds of costumes, it showed a community of diversity. And then it also was adapted to create interesting taglines like dog eyes. Another example of theological activism is when Bree Newsom took down the Confederate flag. This was theological activism because she chose a symbolic location, just as Seth Todd did. So the location is important. And the flag was symbolizing the racism that she wanted to take down. And it also had a theological claim. She was reciting scriptures as she was going up the pole, but her words did not make it to the news. Nonetheless, this was theological activism, even if the theological claim was silenced by the media. If you remember, this was also, at least the image went viral as well. A third example is the Stations of the Cross. I want you to notice, we're going to watch this reel now, and I want you to notice the photographs under the text in the reel. Thank you. As you can see, the location was important too. They were at Palm Beach County Courthouse. They were showing what makes God cry today by making a connection between the Stations of the Cross and what is going on in the world today. And they were tying Jesus to the bodies of people marginalized today, the body of Jesus and the body of people marginalized today. So they were making a theological claim, they were denouncing, and they were proclaiming because they were making a theological claim, but they were not enacting an alternative future of divine justice. They were not saying, what is the alternative to that? They just stayed in the denouncing. And they were making a theological claim that was very valid and necessary because lament is a very important part of healing for communities that are oppressed. The final example that I want to share with you, the fourth example, it's not the final, there are so many other examples, but final for this presentation, it goes to words. It's a prayer for reparation and restoration. This one has all the elements except for enactment until we perform it. So we bring it to completion when we pray it. So we are going to pray it now to bring it to completion, to perform it. Let's pray. To the one who demands justice, inspire us to become Rodfei Tzedek, pursuers of justice in our lives and in our communities. Give us the strength to resist power wielded with fear and dread. Fill us with the vision and purpose to build a power yet greater, a power rooted in solidarity, liberation, and love. Grant us the courage to dismantle systems of oppression, and when they are no more, let us dedicate our wealth and resources toward the well-being of all. May we abolish all forms of state violence, that we might make way for a world free of racism and militarization, a world where no one profits off the misery of others, a world where the bills owed those who have been colonized, enslaved, and dispossessed are finally paid in full. Inspire us with the knowledge that real justice is indeed at hand, that we may realize the world we know is possible right here, right now, in our own day. May our thoughts and our hopes, our words and our deeds guide us toward a future of reparation, of restoration, of justice. I'll call Yoshvei Tevel, for all who dwell on earth. Amen. And now it's your turn. I will give you this to bridge to your normal life after this event is over. To generate a work of artivism, select your preferred system of communication. That may be song, visual art, performance, poetry, doodling, playing with blocks, with Play-Doh, even words. So select that preferred system of communication to design, produce, and publicly share a work of artivism. I have a student to share it in a t-shirt once. Proclaim the good news of divine liberation through the articulation of theological arguments, through artivism, connecting them to the issues that affect a specific community, to heal, challenge, transform, and care for the community, ideally a community that you belong to. In your work of artivism, you may include relevance to an issue affecting the community that will witness the work of artivism. It must be based on analysis. You analyze the issues that afflict a specific community and that require the intervention. Association of the identified issue with a theological concept. Denunciation of the evil in the world, that is what breaks God's heart. The proposal for an alternative order in the world, that is the justice that God wants in the world. And an interpretation of a sacred text. Ideally, it must be based on careful and thoughtful exegesis or hermeneutic using scholarly accepted methods of biblical interpretation. I invite you to give it a try, because now it's your turn to disrupt what breaks God's heart and to enact the alternative future full of divine justice, however it looks like, feels like, sounds like, smells like, and tastes like. Go forth and do theoartivism. So help us God.
Can we please give another rousing round of applause? Thank you so much for challenging us. I have so many points of entry, so little time, but I am so excited to be in this conversation with you, and I know already that this will be something, a lasting conversation, relationship between the both of us. So I have so many notes, but I want to start. One theme that is raised for me, both in your presentation here and in at least the chapter you have here, shameless plug, in the text Theopoetics in color, that I'm going to theme around epistemological privilege. We were talking in our practical theologies for social transformation class on yesterday about practicing theologies and who gets to say that they know, or whose knowing is valued. And so I raised the example in my own context, how there were older women that in my social location and tradition, we identify them as church mothers, and that they would sit at the front of the church, and in their bodies they would rock. Right? And in this rocking would produce then a sound, an audible sound, no words to it, just a moan and a hum. But it was after that rock, after that moan, after that hum, that there is a familiar refrain for some in these traditions. And it was, I know that I know that I know that I know. Or translated as, you can't make me, this is how we say it in my tradition. You can't make me doubt him. I know too much about him. I'm framing this question in this way because what your work is inviting us to not only deconstruct, but construct our own sources of knowing. So if you would talk a little bit about, maybe a little bit about your own journey to getting to this place with identifying your body as an epistemological site, and not just an epistemological site, but in your body is the first space and place where you engage in theological artivism.
Yes.
That's a lot, I know.
Yes. Yes, but you're right on, because the ways of the academy are that theology, and then there's a space there that they don't fill in, which right now we know it means white, right? Mm-hmm. White theology comes first, and then it goes to the practices, right? Mm-hmm. And we were talking how when you and I were doing our studies, there was no like the theology that would give the justification for our practice. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't write about what we wanted to write because there was no theology, abstract theology to justify it. But in my brain, I was like, says who? Because you can do it backwards. And mm-hmm. and I didn't know back then that that's called epistemology. Mm-hmm. It's like, my body knows. Mm. And you can generate theology out of the embodied practice. That's the way I knew things were. But of course, in academia, it's like, you just got here, you are nobody to tell me that. But your questions about my journey and my body, as my body knew, because my grandmother knew. Mm. So you are telling me about these church mothers, and you immediately took me to my grandmother. And she was the first one who taught me how to teach. She was the first one who taught me about experiential education. Because she would take us to the beach to talk to the fishermen so we would understand the apostles and the disciples and their trade, right? And then the other thing is, my parents would play roles in the church plays that my pastor wrote for preaching. He wrote plays for preaching. He didn't write them only for Easter and Christmas, as I was told by white colleagues when I got to the States. And I say white colleagues because I mean, we had this conversation in which like, why are you doing theater for preaching? And I went like, are you saying that you don't? And then I started doing research, and I found out that this is not only common in my tradition, in Puerto Rico it's a common thing, but I also found out that it's common in African American churches. And also in white evangelical churches, but it is not common in white mainstream. And so when I started explaining, they would say, oh, like Christmas pageants. And for me, it's like, no, not like Christmas pageants, because we are not reenacting a Bible story necessarily. My pastor was preaching. He is a historian, and he is a playwright, and he was bringing his whole self to the craft of preaching, and he was preaching something. He was not just reenacting Bible stories. So it's different. And I was in the womb when my mom was playing both of them. I have pictures, and my mom would go, that's you in the belly, in my belly. So I was in the play since the womb. So I was meant to do this. And I was called to do this through a dream when I was about 9. I had a dream that I felt it was God calling me to spread the gospel through dramatic arts. And that's how it started. And it's a long story that I'm going to stop there. But yes, epistemology.
Yeah. I'm so appreciative of the visuals that you provided for us, and I'm also thinking about Sister Akokomo. Ask for apologies if I have pronounced her name wrong. She was the sister who climbed up to the Statue of Liberty. This had to be maybe around 2018. It was around the same time that Bree Newsom climbed the flagpole. I'm also thinking about a woman that I encountered via social media who, in protest of George Floyd's murder, interrupted traffic and sat herself on the street. And so you're making me think of the ways that bodies have always been engaging in this sort of activism, even not beginning with, but certainly when you provided the images of the Station of the Cross and with Jesus. And so I want to continue to center bodies, but I want to read this part in this text because I think it's going to help where I want us to go. In your essay called Fleshly Theopoetics, Performance as Resistance in the Theological Academy, you write this: the Academy lives into phallogocentric systems of thought. It has been privileging rational thought, words, and rational logic, as well as male ways of thinking and being, ever since Plato founded his school of philosophy in the 4th century BCE. His students were men, Athenian property owners, Greek-speaking, and idle, as opposed to engaged in work like enslaved people. Their social location allowed them to be academics. Freed from manual labor, they applied themselves to metaphysical thought, abstract as an end itself. In addition to this freedom, they learned from their teacher Plato about the allegory of the cave, which to this day in the social imaginary of Western culture privileges pure abstract ideas as true knowledge and disregards material things as deceptive appearances. You go on, I just need to read this last sentence to really click into what I want to ask. An example of how this ideology permeates the academy today is how the theological work that mostly Europeans and Euro-Americans produce, lacking connection to experience, materiality, or bodies of flesh and bone, is called theology. But the theological work that mostly BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color persons produce, which is connected to their embodied experience and material conditions of their social locations, is called contextual theology. Breath right there. Right, a real breath. I'm raising this because this is not just the academy, because the church influenced by the West, is also logo-centered, also oppressed by fallow logo-centered ways of being. And so if you talk a little bit about what it means. I mean, we talked about centering knowledge and, how bodies know, but also what it means or why it's prophetic to identify a particular kind of preaching body. What is so prophetic about that? And how does that kind of prophetic performance mend the fracture? How does the prophetic performance of a marginalized body mend this fractured world?
Oh, yes. Yes. First of all, I want to say, yes, you're right on with the examples you gave. I think is one of the things I didn't say and what you're pointing out is that it comes out of the marginalized bodies. And I think it's part of what we do to metabolize the trauma by restoring. Is a way of healing from the trauma by introducing something different to the narrative, by reframing the narrative. And we do it. It's us doing it. Nobody else is telling us. That's how it's mending. It's like we see the fracture, and we're going to thrive in it and from it, right? And it's in that's how it's prophetic. It's in this, like, I see the fracture, so I denounce it, and I'm going to thrive in it by showing you how it can be different. The other thing I didn't mention there is that comes from womanist thought is that when I do that, it's not only for my own well-being. It's not individualist. Or individualistic, is communal.
Right.
I am
survival
showing
of
you
the entire community.
Is for the whole community.
Yes.
So I'm showing you how the world can be. That's what is mending. So I go back to that formula of denounce and proclaim if you're staying with the words, disrupt and enact if you're going to art and projecting that alternative world. That's what is mending. Yeah. And I think it's mending too because it's coming out of the bodies of those who are oppressed, that are fractured, and they are metabolizing the evil into something positive, right? And using their plasticity, neuroplasticity to insert something positive into to reframe the traumatic story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm listening and I'm thinking it is also prophetic, bringing in more womanist thought, not only for the survival of the entire community, but what it means, and even in your presentation, for us to see these bodies, and what you've been doing is naming, right? So that it is prophetic for us to be able to name and self-define and determine who we are, right?
Yeah,
not just exactly, right? So phenomenal.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned Jesus, and another example is you mentioned the Stations of the Cross, but also when Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem, that fits all the characteristics. And when Jesus turned the tables, that fits all the characteristics. And also, it's prophetic because God called the prophets to do it. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they were called to use symbolic action as the mode of preaching in very specific ways to prophesize the changing, the turning of the world, and changing from empire to liberation.
Yeah, I mean, well, now, listen, I don't know if this is eco-womanism, what I'm about to say, or creation studies, but when you talk about Jesus entering Jerusalem, it makes, and using these symbolic acts as preaching, so then I'm thinking about the colt that Jesus rides in on, right? And how not only are we restoring bodies, but we are also restoring sort of this order that we've been socialized to believe, to engage in a hierarchical order between creation, right? So what does it mean to understand preaching or symbolically as from the position of the cult that is holding, right, this fractured world, that is holding all of this, right? To say that not only my body has a voice, but other forms of creation have voices is also a way for us to engage in the prophetic. Very profound, very profound, very profound.
For sure.
I want to ask now, because we can converse all day.
Yes.
I want to turn to, we're going to take a break in a minute at about 11:30. We're going to break for a few minutes and come back. But before we do that, I want to invite a question or two from our colleagues in the audience, or if there's someone who is monitoring our YouTube page, if there's a question that has come on our page. Are there any questions, comments? I'm sure that someone from my course has a question or a comment. Kelly, April, nay. April does. Okay. Do we have a microphone? Just a second, April.
Thank you. I just have a comment. I appreciate what you said as far as the contextual theology within this artwork is a way of healing. And it made me think about us overcoming by the words of our testimony, and that through this artistry, we are giving a testimony. So it is healing. That's just what came to me. So I really appreciate your work and how you are explaining this, and it's making me think about how I can use this as well in the ministry that God has called me to, as far as helping women heal from domestic violence and sexual assault. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Joshua behind you has a question or comment. Oh, he's working the mic. Okay.
I'd like to express gratitude. I've been an artist all my life, and within artistry, I've struggled with racism, sexism, homophobia, which led me to move into more of a gender and women's studies place, which made me an activist ultimately. But I've been trying to figure out, how do these two things come together? And it's divine to be here hearing you speak and to give me language for what I feel like I'm walking into. I shared a short film that I made recently for Dr. Sampson's Sacred Memory course, and it was an opportunity for me to try to figure out how to artistically articulate like the things that I'm feeling and what's coming up for me and what feels like a call. And you've given me language in this theo-artivism to be able to connect with other scholars that are in alignment with the direction I feel like God is calling me to go in. So I just wanted to say thank you for your work and for giving me some confirmation and affirmation about what I feel like Divinity School is pushing me to do.
You go, Prophet.
Here comes the microphone. Just a second, Rick.
Thank you for being here today. I'm in Dr. Sampson's Practical Theologies for Social Change class, and yesterday we spoke about fugitive theologies.
We did.
Would artivism be considered fugitive theology?
Yes. So I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to say what I meant, and I'm going to let my colleague respond. We are using fugitive in the way that Professor Jarvis uses fugitive pedagogy, this is not simply a running away from, but this is a stealing away into space where one could be named, and a kind of reclamation and or a restoring. So I would say that yes, theological artivism is absolutely a fugitive practicing theological method by which we engage in this prophetic work. And did you coin theological artivism? Is this your term? So I'm asking because this is also important, right? How you are hearing terms and who's naming terms and how they are coining and using them. These particular terms is also a form of prophetic being, right? Because of which bodies get to determine or get to contribute into the academy, a term to be used for the broader academy. Thank you.
Dr. Valle-Ruiz, thank you for being with us. You've honored us with your presence.
Can you speak up, Dr.
Yeah,
Gunderson? Thank you.
It's not Joshua's fault. He gave me the microphone. I want to sort of flip the process. So we're mostly theology people in this space today, thinking about art and your model of prophetic art. I'm thinking about all of the tens of thousands of artists who in this traumatic moment of social, political, cultural meltdown are finding themselves drawn way beyond art into the presence of ultimate issues, ultimate things, ultimate trauma. And so talk a little bit about, I'm sure as you move around the world, you end up engaging lots of artists and sort of helping them find that theological language, maybe a totally new language, but ultimate language helps them be better artists. I have a playwright daughter, so I happen to know this is happening.
Did you understand the question?
So, colleague, can you clarify your question? We don't quite understand. Part of it is also the acoustics in here,
Yeah.
so we're
I'm
not
sorry.
hearing you well. What might be helpful, if you don't mind and if you have capacity and are able, if you can come right here to this step with the mic so we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm a Baptist. I like to go to the altar. So
Come.
I'll speak more personally. So I have a daughter who's a playwright, and she writes lots and lots of stuff. But she is finding in this moment more and more need for ultimate language, not just social, cultural stuff, but actually the ultimate language that moves into theological kind of vocabulary.
What is ultimate language?
I'm trying to avoid white theology
Oh,
words.
you gotta say that, friend.
Yeah.
This is prophetic for a fractured world. Be prophetic, say that.
Well, but it's this feels like lots of code language, and I want to have your language used, not language that I might be comfortable with. But I'm sure as you move in the arts community, you're pulling people towards theological community and theological dialogue. So
Yeah.
I'm observing as much as asking a question, but I'm curious whether that's actually happening.
As an educator, my students are in theological school, right? So first of all, people get a little bit off-put when they hear this and they think I'm teaching this. If they don't self-identify as artists, they think this is not for them. But that's not what it is. I start by saying, like, humans are creators. So, and that's why when I put the slide of this is your bridge for when you're after here, select your best mode of communication. So I'm not in the business of creating artists. I meet people where they are as an educator, I affirm them, and I want them to become better them. I don't want them to become better me. So I don't think I have tried to move artists into theological language unless they want to, because for me, that is traumatic. I would be traumatizing somebody if I'm into decolonial studies, and religion has been imposed on people for millennia. And that's not right. So consent is important. If they ask me to do that, I will gladly do that. The other thing is I resist language. I have an issue and a beef with language. So this is why artivism is for me a better space, because it's about symbol. Theopoetics is about symbol. I affirm language, and that's why I ended with a prayer, because I want to affirm those for whom language is the art that they practice, even if that language is prose. And that is trauma for me, right? Because I have been forced to write in a certain way that it was totally foreign for me, right? So I've been looking for symbols, and I've been looking for nonverbal communication. If somebody wants to learn from me how to move into theological language and into symbols, I would gladly do that, starting where they are. And I will ask a bunch of questions to see where they are. But this is the beauty of, like, in these times, art therapy, right? This is similar to art therapy. What I was telling Melva about what is mending is that when we do it for ourselves, we are doing our therapy for ourselves.
That's right.
That's what we are doing. It's like this fractured world is fracturing me, and I cannot deal with this right now, so I'm going to imagine something better, something that is life-giving. That is not this. And I'm going to express that in the best way that I know. And if that is a play, writing a play, yes. If that is filming, yes. If that is Play-Doh, yes. If that is doodling, yes. If that is humming and rocking, yes. If that is performing art, physical art, avant-garde, which are the kinds of art that I do with my body, no words, yes. So you're going to love the one that is upcoming.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
It's like,
I am so...
It's a furious chameleon that is dancing. So no words needed. I don't know if that answers your questions, but I'm not trying to make artists better artists unless they ask me to, but that's typically not, that's not my first way of approaching this. My way of approaching is like, what is the gift that God gave you? Use that.
And I also hear you saying, bringing your other work again, but that you, by doing this, you're refusing this binary.
Yes.
You're refusing to have folks choose from which part of their body they, or to make primary or to function from, right? We have a question from someone online that says, from T. Cherie Dickerson, 13, two-part, are there any suggestions on how to amplify the work of fellow activists without appropriating their work or intellectual frameworks? That's one part. And then Dr. Valle-Ruiz from the same person, do you advise artivists to have legal counsel or consultancy prior to participating in public artivism actions?
Oof. Yes, so, by the way, there's a lady here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna start with the latter. One of the things I realized when we were, when I taught the course on artivism the first time, is that I needed to add a section on safety, and that includes having a lawyer on retainer, because you can get arrested. And also, another thing about the safety is that many, like Bree Newsom, just like Rosa Parks, they didn't do this out of their, they had a community.
And a plan.
And a plan. The idea was thought out by a whole community.
Yes.
And the whole community thought a plan, a safety plan. Like Bree Newsom, you didn't see in the icons that came out, but there was a white man embracing the pole down. And why? Because actually the police came and they wanted to put electricity to the pole, and they didn't because they were not going to electrocute a white man. You know, but if the white man was not embracing that pole, she probably would have been dead by now. So, or at least gravely injured. So yes, these are things that are important, and talking to a lawyer is important. And there are pro bono services I'm sure we can find when it comes to activism. So find siblings who are in the struggle who can give those kind of legal services. And then the first question was about appropriation. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, that is tricky because once you go public, I think you can give us more about that because you went really public really early. I struggle with that myself, with how to go public and protect my content, but the frameworks themselves are ancient. Like I was saying, like the prophets, the Hebrew Bible prophets have been doing this. So the big picture frameworks are public domain, if you would. But consulting a copyright lawyer ahead of time is one thing that comes to mind. I did that, and they told me a few pointers. I know that sending some stuff to yourself and keep it sealed, that gives you some evidence of when you created the work the other way is copyrighted before you share it publicly. So that's another way. And then to know that there's some things that are copyrightable and there are some things that are not. So again, consulting a lawyer, especially like a copyright or entertainment lawyer, is a good way to go.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
we're out
you.
of time? Yeah.
Do you have a question? Or,
Yeah.
You are the last question.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you again for your time. My name is Satara Jacobs. I am a student here. I am also an archivist and by way of photography, a photojournalist. And I have done a lot of work globally and nationally here. My most recent was here in Winston-Salem. I had an exhibit at Milton Rhodes. It was Collective Liberation, Palestinian Resilience, and Parallels to the Black American Experience. My question is, I would love for you to speak on the universal language of art and how it is able to oftentimes kind of transcend time and space and even differences amongst people. So I would love to know your thoughts on how art could also be a tool for those barriers and can kind of outlast the artists that are producing it in these areas.
How art can outlast?
How art is like universal and transcends like time. A lot of times when we look at things like photography or even artifacts, it often transcends the time of the artist that made it.
Yeah.
And how that is also important in artistry.
Yeah. Well, you said it. What you said, that's exactly right. I also fail in overestimating that power because I also found that art is very cultural. And so the universality of the art, I was overestimating. Then I found out like, oh no, actually some people are not understanding because we don't share some cultural cues. But yes, if we produce certain artifacts, then the artifacts themselves go beyond our life. And the main theories that I use in performance studies, Diana Taylor.
Yes.
She talks about how art is, especially performing arts, are ephemeral, and she's not on that school of thought. She's like, no, actually, performance is not ephemeral. The knowledge, it transfers knowledge from body to body, and that remains. So, in a sense, it's eternal. So that even the performing art, which is, so she talks about the archive and the repertoire.
Yeah.
So the repertoire is that knowledge that is transferred from body to body, so that remains, even if it's not recorded. It's transferred from body to body. This is what's happening right now in this room. We are transferring knowledge from body to body, beyond what we are talking.
And
It's
whether or
just-
not, right, and whether or not you identify as an artist,
Right.
continuing with Diana Taylor in the archive and the repertoire, that the repertoire is, we're performing now how we've shown up, the art, the items we chose to adorn ourselves with, right, that move, that communicate something, right? Thank
Yes.
you so very
That's why
much.
our picture's strong.
Exactly.
We're sisters.
Listen, I'm so excited. And when we go to break, which we're getting ready to go to, I just want to give this to at least before we break. Throughout the day, I want to come back to this theopoetics, but also the theological artivism and articulating the spiritual meaning that comes to us in symbolic freeing. The other part that I keeps coming to me is like at some point we have to talk about death. And the way as I'm listening to you, I keep thinking and hearing the words of Mamie Till, the mother of Emmett Till, who was 14 years old and who was brutally bludgeoned and murdered and drowned in the Tallahatchie River in Mississippi for something that he was alleged to have done, but has later been revealed he did not do. And his body was so badly bruised and wounded, and that the funeral caretakers wanted to close the casket, and his mother said, no, keep the casket open and let the world see what they've done to my child. Along the lines, I think of Fannie Lou Hamer when she gave her testimony at the Mississippi as a part of the delegation for the Mississippi Democratic delegation that was trying to be seated at the Democratic National Committee. And even though she was using voice, but what it meant for her body as symbolic action to be in this place, and also for it to be televised, right? So, I mean, what you are providing for us, and again, this prophetic witness. So the first, with being in this casket, that this is, without saying a word, preaching a sermon, right, that is indicting this world, as well as Fannie Lou Hamer's body as a black woman who is a sharecropper in a segregated South, who is now positioning her knowledge, not asking for permission, right, but saying that my body is a site of knowledge and I am going to share this knowledge in this way. You have given us so many jewels to think about, and I want to thank you for being here with us, and I look forward to our conversation later on and just the conversation that you and I will have. At this time, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back at 11:45, where we will be in conversation with Reverend Dr. Carolyn Browning-Helsel. But please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Lise Valle-Ruiz.